Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Camilla and today I'm wrapping up my month of June. I know it's mid-August and I should be wrapping up July, but I am late. Actually, I haven't even wrapped up March and April, but let's not even discuss that for now. I read 6 books in June, so I'll be, discussing those. And also, I'm sort of wrapping up May as well. Mostly in May, I read books for the Women's Prize for fiction, but there was one book that I read during that month that wasn't for the list, so I thought I would just kind of put it in with the month of June reading. It was actually on my June TBR because I filmed it before we went to Romania, and I ended up just chucking it in my suitcase to go to Romania, and I just read it over there. So yeah, done and dusted, so that was nice. And then 6 books in June. We were on holiday in the south of England, so we went to Devon and Cornwall, which was lovely, and I read 3 books while we were down there, which was, it's always lovely to have time to kind of disconnect a little bit and read a bit more and just relax, So let's go book by book, but let's follow the TBR. So when I did my TBR for June, I'm actually really pleased that for once I did get to all the books that I mentioned in my TBR video. So the first book that I mentioned was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. I had an audio from the library, which I think I got back in April, and I was really struggling to kind of properly listen to it, like to sit down and get into it. I think I've mentioned that before in some of my previous videos, and I thought in June I would properly give it a try, and I had time to, I think I was doing some DIY in the house, or I did something anyway, and I was able to kind of properly listen, especially the start. The start is when you need to be like, what's going on, who are these people, and why am I interested? And I was able to get through it. I ended up really enjoying that book. It's not one that I would revisit, but I thought it was really good. So we obviously follow 3 main narrators. So we have Celestial and Roy. They're a couple at the center of this novel, and they are sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Roy gets accused of a crime, a sexual crime, and he gets put into jail without really kind of real due diligence. And it's sort of, that happens really early on, and then we follow them through letters and correspondence about what happens in the first few years that he's in jail, and it's really difficult in their relationship. We get some backstory on both of the characters as well, with their parents and their relationships. I thought it was a really interesting window and critique of obviously the American justice system, and also the mass incarceration, especially affecting Black men. So I thought that was really interesting, especially Roy getting quite dehumanized through the whole process, and then while being in jail as well, especially even at the personal level, with his wife and his friends and his family, and it becomes quite hard, obviously. But obviously on the other side we get Celestial. Like, there's that one moment in the book where they write to each other, and Roy keeps being like, I'm innocent, and she says, so am I. And it's like, they're both so, I don't want to say self-centered, because we all are, obviously. We all see the world through our own eyes, right, through our own perspective, but they both have their own perspective, and I thought that was a really interesting way to have that set up in this book. I thought that at that point it was quite balanced in that sense between the narration, and they both quite felt sorry for themselves, and you kind of appreciate why, on both sides of the coin, in a sense. The third narrator, because I mentioned there's 3 narrators, we get a third voice, who is actually Celestial's a kind of friend from childhood that she grew up with, and who becomes one of Roy's friends, and we start getting his perspective as well through the whole affair going on, especially because Celestial gets kind of closer to him while Roy is in prison. I think for me, where the novel struggle was in the second half, when Roy gets out of prison, and I think it does a good job at showing us like the difficulty of going back into life after something so traumatizing and so dehumanizing as going to prison, especially probably even more for a crime you haven't committed. But there are some really difficult moments at that point, and they're difficult to talk about because I don't want to give spoilers. So I won't give more, but I did struggle with some of the stuff that came out in the second half. However, I did really like the ending, and I thought it was wrapped up quite nicely, especially for like a literary fiction. But overall, I think I quite enjoyed that book. Like I said, I wouldn't revisit it, and I would recommend it if you're interested in like the themes that I've mentioned. But it's obviously good to know that there's a lot of mention of rape in this book. The second book that I read was Eve by Cat Bohannon, and this was longlisted for the Women's Prize for nonfiction. I was interested in it like from the start, and if you've seen my mid-year celebration tag, you'll see that it was one of my highlights of the first half of the year. It's potentially my favorite book that I've read this year so far. It was so good. I waited for it for a long time, and I was able to take it with me on holiday. I talked to my like librarian, and they extended like the due date to when I came back from holiday so I could actually properly sit down with it. This book does a great job as basically giving you a story while also having the scientific elements. While I did glaze over some bit, I did think that Bohannon did a great job at explaining some difficult concepts with biology and evolution, even some historical stuff, to someone like me that has no scientific background really, like since like high school. So I think she did a really good job, and it was so funny at times and so gut-wrenching at other times. There's a bit in the menopause chapter, actually I'm gonna read it to you. That's the real story about menopause. It's not the night sweats, it's not the dry vagina, it's not really about menopause at all. It's that we outlive the men we love, we outlive our brothers and husbands and lovers and friends. We have to live on, all of us, and watch them go. And I was just crying at this point. Probably the hormones that she discusses in this book. But just generally, yeah, I learned so much, and I get like, oh my god, like to my husband, like, did you know this? And did you know that? And then be like, oh my gosh, this explains so many things, and this is so interesting to get this perspective on things that potentially happen to me or things that you see happen, you know, to people around you. And yeah, just excellent. Unfortunately, I do feel like the people who need to read this book won't read it, which is true, but I love books, I guess, that are like must reads, is that it's kind of preaching to the choir a little bit. But I almost feel like this should be like a must read for like teenagers or like early adults, like young adults. So yeah, let me know if you've read it and what you think about it as well. I've had to change a little bit my camera setup, so I don't know if it's like, anyway. Okay, next book that I read was Pageboy by Elliot Page. I gave this nonfiction sort of like a 3.5, which was a bit generous. So this is very much a memoir about Elliot Page's life, kind of growing up in Halifax in Canada, and then kind of as a child actor into adulthood, obviously his relationship with his parents, and then I guess with the industry as well, or within the industry, and with women and so on. And it does kind of go on about the transition that he went through. And yeah, there's a lot to this book. To be completely honest, I didn't love it, and it's always difficult with memoirs because they can be difficult because you need to really get into the head of someone. I saw a lot of reviews mention how this book was really disjointed, and I do have to agree. The way that the chapters were set up, you kind of almost never know where you are in the in a timeline of Page's life. So it starts, I guess, in his 20s or something, and then we're back to childhood, and I feel like that didn't help connect us to the story. I think that sometimes there was like connection that Page wanted to make between events maybe at a Hollywood party and then events in his childhood, but I thought it was disjointed, and I struggle sometimes to make myself the connection. I like to see them. So potentially I didn't kind of appreciate it as much because I struggled to see the parallels potentially. There were a lot of tensions as well. At some point we got a tangent about this like mass tragedy that happened in Halifax in like, I want to say the 1800s. Okay. Like, I don't know why this was added. This book is full of trauma as well. Which I don't know, I didn't expect it somehow. I don't know, like I just went really blind into this, and it was difficult because sometimes for almost no reason whatsoever, like he would mention, yeah, that it was basically there was a ship accident, and then this massive explosion happened, and one of the parts of Halifax was almost like wiped out. And at some point he mentions one of the roles he played in the film about a girl being like really seriously abused, and I was just like, wow, like I don't know if I wanted all of that additional trauma into this, but I don't know what it added to. Maybe it adds a context of like what he was exposed to growing up, but it just felt like a lot, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of trauma generally in the book, and I feel like it's stemming from some of his relationship, even like with his father and stepmother, and then but also sometimes within himself, you know, with acceptance and stuff like that. But I think like that's the journey that you go on a little bit, and I wish that had been more linear, that you go on with Elliot Page in this book, and that's the way that it sort of not ends, because obviously I feel like a memoir of when you're in your 30s, you know, like it doesn't end, but when the book ends, I did feel that it had a positive note of hopefulness. And obviously in our current political landscape it is difficult, because it just feel like everything's always so negative, especially looking at the lack of acceptance, I guess, acceptance or lack thereof of trans people. But I felt like toward that end we had something a bit more maybe beautiful to look at, but it is quite a seriously dark book. So yeah, a bit saddened to come with this kind of not that great review, but you know, generally yeah, you can go into it if you kind of know where or what you're expecting out of it. On a much lighter note, obviously, I then listened to the audiobook of Romantic Comedy by Kristin Sittenfeld, and I think I gave that one 3.5, 3.75, whatever. Like, I think I got a hold from the library, and I was like, I'll give it a try, I'll see. I knew it was about a comedy writer, like sort of SNL-ish, and then them getting, or her getting into a relationship with like a famous person, and yeah, I wasn't sure about it basically. And then a lot of people on my June TBR wrote, I actually really enjoyed that, and I don't love sort of romantic comedy books, you know, rom-coms and all of that. So I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And it was really well narrated, like the woman who did the narration did a great job. It was really engaging, and I guess the tone of Sittenfeld is just engaging as well. So yeah, just a really cute rom-com. I did think at the beginning was a little bit like almost like antagonistic, you know what I mean? Like it was very much like, oh, cool girl, self-deprecating, like I'm not like the other girls a little bit, which I was like approaching with like, ooh. But then it got much better and like much more real, and I guess that's part of the journey within the book as well, the character. So yeah, it's like an SNL writer gets really flirty with this like famous musician, and then they sort of they don't really get into a relationship, but they sort of have a thing. And then COVID happened, which I thought was actually done really well, the way that it was introduced, because it does feel weird sometimes when people are mentioning like 2018, 2019, 2020, and there's like no COVID like on the horizon. It feels jarring because it impacted everyone's life. So I thought that was really interesting to mention, like lockdown and all of that. So yeah, generally a kind of a good one if you're looking for something kind of light and breezy. Then I read Virtual Strangers. That's the one that I mentioned was on, it was on my June TBR, but I read it in May because I brought it with me to Romania. So it's by Sam Canning, and I gave this 3 stars, and I think it was a little bit generous, but you know, I don't know if this is a debut. It felt like it a little bit. It felt like a slightly lesser Beth O'Leary, but I would really look out for her second book, or I don't know if she has other books, but for the next one, because I think I would be quite intrigued by it, because I think it did a good job, but sometimes it just fell short on some bits. So we follow Ava, who is a private PR person, representative for this like weirdo actor has been, because the situation happened to her in her past, that she's had to kind of move back to Edinburgh with her mum, and it's been really difficult, and she has a relationship with her best friend who's just had a second baby, and she's trying to meet guys, and it's just a whole thing. Like there's a lot going on in this book. Maybe that's also why some of this stuff wasn't done as well. Because she also she also meets someone on a Agatha Christie fan fiction site, and they start flirting online, and it's like a whole thing, but then that gets sort of abandoned. Like, it's just bizarre elements adding throughout. But then also in her private PR work, she uses a kind of co-working space where she meets someone as well, and her best friend introduces her to someone, so there's a lot going on. I did think at times it was a bit of a downer. Maybe that's also why, like, I didn't have just positive feeling. And also, this says they're putting the hot in hot desking. I don't think there was any hot in there. Like, no sauciness. I think they kiss. I think that's the main thing she does. Or like if they mention they slept together or something, they just mention something, that she slept with someone. And I was just like, I need some sexiness, you know? Anyway, so yeah, I would say this is like an average rom-com book. I did like it was based in Edinburgh. Obviously, that's kind of cool when you know exactly, you know, where they are and stuff like that. And like I said, I would definitely look out for a second one, or like another book by Sam Canning, and see what else comes out, because it's always nice to have a little light. It was quite easy and quick to read. Oh, free. All right, so yeah, this one, fine. And out of my TBR, you'll notice that I actually didn't mention The Woman by Kristin Hannah. I did get I had a hold on an audiobook for that one. I didn't really know what it was about that much. I listened to the first chapter and I decided that I did not care. So basically, yeah, it was really heavy-handed on the war and on being heroes. Like, men are heroes because they go to war. And I was like, I'm not here for any of that stuff. Maybe it subverts it. Like, I would really love to hear what people say, but that was not my vibe. So yeah, I sort of DNF, but also it's just not on my radar. I also read 2 more novels that were on my TBR. The first one was The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. This is an arc that I got, an audio arc that I got from NetGalley. It had already come out, but whatever. I got to it in that month. I really enjoyed it, actually. I think I mentioned in my celebration tag that this was my favorite book from 2024 that came out in 2024, which is maybe also one of the only books that came out this year that I read. But anyway, I'm not sure it totally accomplished what it was trying to do, because it was trying to do a lot. It was spy novel, time travel, historical commentary on race, climate change, belonging in Britain. Like, just, there was a lot of themes. A lot of themes. I'm not sure they were all well done, but I still went for the ride and I loved it. Oh, it has some romance as well. Like, whatever you like, they probably have it in this book. So we follow a civil servant in kind of a near future who works at a bridge. So she is part of a department that welcomes expats from the past. So they've plucked people in time, well, basically when they've almost died. They've plucked them and then brought them to the present, and then, I don't know, I forget why, I forget all of the actual reasoning and whatever they're trying to do. I was here for it though. Her expat is from the Victorian era, and he's like basically this hot like sea captain. It becomes like a thriller spy novel, like I said. And yeah, actually talking about it, I want to revisit it now, because I feel like I had a really good time. I didn't know where it was going. Now that I know where it went, I feel like I want to revisit to actually, I feel like I would get more out of it. And I think it might be on my very early predictions list for the Women's Prize for next year. But we'll see if it stays on that list. You know, it's very preliminary. But really enjoyed it. Really recommend if you sort of enjoy any of the things I mentioned. It's the ride to go on. Don't think about it too much. And finally, the last book that I read was Reputation by Lex Croucher. So I've owned this book for ages. 2021, I think, is when I received it from the Rare Birds book club. I started reading it, did not click with it at all. Like, this is following a teenager, a very sort of modern teenager, but it's in the Regency era, and she makes friends, and she's a bit like, she's trying to be in with the cool kids and the rich kids who are very privileged, and she doesn't come from that background, but she hopes that it will kind of, like, she'll be able to, you know, get some stuff from that, I guess, like a marriage or whatever. I think objectively I would have liked this when I was a teenager, but as an adult, cringe a little bit. I was really annoyed at the main character, Georgiana, because she kind of tries to kind of navigate society. what I did like about this book is the hints of Jane Austen novels throughout. Just sometimes like random, I'd be like, oh my god, that's from this Jane Austen novel, this is from this one. And I really enjoyed it. It has a very modern take on justice and like sexual assault and like consensual relationship basically. And I think the main character does, like in the end, learn her lesson. She fights for justice like a real book heroine basically, and she makes real friends and a real relationship as well by the end. And there's something really beautiful like by the end. But the only way I got through it was through the audiobook, which I thought was really good. I got basically it on NetGalley, and it was really performed well. And I don't think I would have actually made it through 430 pages of this voice if it hadn't been on audio, because I really enjoyed the second half. The one thing I will say is, I don't know why, maybe it's because Lex Croucher, but I feel like people always say like this is LGBT friendly, and there's some hints of it, but it's definitely not one that I think you'd be like, oh yeah, let's read that for LGBT kind of themes. No, I don't think so. It's very like, I don't know, it feels very like white, middle class, straight girl, you know, narrative. But anyway, alright, I'm glad that I was able to sort of get through this book in that sense. Don't know if I'll be keeping it. I might unhaul it just because, yeah, I'm just not sure. Like in the end, I think it was alright. I enjoyed the experience with the audiobook, but you know. So a sort of interesting mix of novels this month, or in June, you know, like rom-com, non-fiction, memoir, just a bit of everything. Well, everything was in the Kaliane Bradley book. But yeah, just generally some, I think I'm quite pleased with it, actually, with that month of reading. So yeah, let me know what you thought of the books that I mentioned, or if if you've read any of them, or if you didn't like them. Yeah, I would love to hear your opinions, and yeah, I'll try to wrap up July at some point. Let's not even talk about March and April. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and see you back. Bye.